so many stories in each piece of art.
The animals are unique.
So there's just story after story, and it's personal to the carver and personal to their families and personal to our sponsors.
The tiger Ouija board was carved by Richard Hanks. Richard was on the bench next to me for 2.5 years as we carved the tiger. Both Richard and myself had never carved before, so it was quite an experience. And the tiger was one of the animals that was overweight and had to be trimmed down in order to reduce the weight for being on the carousel. You can see on his strap there are many folks, once they realized he was putting names of the grandchildren, other family members wanted to be recognized, and so their initials have been put on the strap. This is Patriot, carved by Barry Hess. What's interesting about our animals on our carousel is that this side is called the romance side. As you can see on the inside of the animal, towards the inside of the carousel, there's as much detail on this side of the animal, which is unusual. This is not the romance side. This horse was carved by Susan Fleener for Girls Inc. It's an inspirational horse for all girls, as you can see from the description.
This is Nellie. Milton Nelson was the carver for this animal. Black horses are not the easiest thing to paint. And of course I taught them, just to make sure they highlight with blues, try to get it to make, you didn't want it to be a flat black. So there's a lot of blue on Nellie. But what I think is really interesting are the little tiny details like the silver conchos. And you look at the knife here, this little saber over here on the side, there's actually just like a silver inlay that's in the handle of it. And I think these little touches are what makes our carousel truly, truly unique.
I spent roughly a little over 3,000 hours, and it took me 18 months.
The buffalo started out as a ride, and I think the head weighed 120 pounds.
I did the head first, and the head was out of proportion based on the body that would be allowed on the carousel. The only solid parts are the horns, the legs, and the tail. The rest of it is hollow. I tried to cut down as much weight as possible, but this thing kept on eating wood like crazy. There's probably about as much wood in this as there is 5 of the regular animals. But even though it's hollow, it still weighs 760 pounds. So it's a pretty good sized little piece of woodwork.
And so by the time Joe just knew that it was going to be too big for the carousel, it was going to be just a beautiful piece.
So instead of scrapping the whole thing, I just asked Reggie if there was any way we could possibly turn it into a static display, more or less a Kodak moment.
It's a buffalo. Give me the buffalo.
I know I was carving a carousel horse because I've had horses all my life, and I knew how they looked and how they felt and where all the bones were. And when I got through the head and the neck, and I was almost through, I guess, the body, and I thought, there are a lot of horses on the carousel, and there's an awful lot of rides that are for little boys, like dragons and tigers and lions. I came in one day and said, I'm going to change mine to a unicorn. And the guys in the room said, why would you want to carve a unicorn? And I said, because little girls love unicorns. This is Morning Glory. I had to learn how to make a horn, which was an interesting project. And in order to make the swirls on the horn, I ended up getting electrical tape, 2 pieces, and winding them around the cone that I'd made and carving in between it so it looked like what I thought a unicorn horn would look like. Well, I carved Morning Glories. They're actually carved out of tupelo instead of basswood because it sands a little better without furring. So they're actually carved and put on with dowel rods. And when we started painting her, I wanted to be a little bit fancier since it was a mythological creature. So I got gold leaf, and she's got a gold leaf mane and tail. And the little girls love her. So after I carved the horse, which took a year and about 800 hours of volunteer time, I then decided I would carve a dancing cat. It's a Siamese cat in a tutu and toe shoes. And it again was for the little girl. And she's also the only carousel animal wearing pants. She's got little jewels in the tutu, some little Swarovski crystals. She's got big blue eyes. Now, whereas we got a lot of the animals here from patterns, this one I just drew myself. And she's the little girl's favorite. And I think it's because of, out of all the animals, most of them love little cats.
Enjoy the ride.
They'll say, "This is the lady that carved the cat." And the kids will give me a big hug and grab my knees or my legs or want to hold me. It's a wonderful feeling. And I know all of us feel that way.
This is the Prince Frog. I carved the frog. I chose the frog when I started to carve this animal back in 2010. Not being a carver, I didn't want to have all the mane that you see on the horses. So the frog was a smooth skin, and it took about 2.5 years to carve the frog, and then it took another 2.5 years for the frog to be painted by a crew of 3 painters. The frog, which is interesting, carries a memory chip in its banner that hopefully in 100 years that will be taken out, and all the activities of creating this carousel are on a little memory chip. Traditionally, when the animal is carved, the body is a box, and the carvers will leave an inscription inside their animals. Specifically, the biggest one is in the wolf. The wolf has a poem to Adai, the wolf that got away from Bays Mountain. Milton Nelson is one of the 4 horsemen. This is his second animal that he had carved. And I like to say the reason they couldn't find Adai is that every Wednesday Adai came in and sat for the carver.
This is Roscoe the rabbit, carved by Reggie Martin.
This is Reggie's second animal that he carved. And Roscoe's the one that has been to the veterinarian several times. He broke his ear and had to be mended back together.
It is neat to be able to see that a lot of the repairs and repaints are very seamless. If I didn't tell you, you wouldn't know about what happened to Roscoe.
So when we break a piece off the animal, they get a purple heart.
When you think of the extent of the length of this project from beginning to end, you know, there's a lot of years that goes into making these. One of the ladies that was working, I remember she was so determined to make sure that the straw hat looked the way it did, and she really worked hard on this hat. She's since passed away, so it's kind of it's bittersweet. But I look at this as part of maybe one of her last really cool projects is with us, and it's still here. I think Roscoe's a lot of fun. Everything down to his little pocket watch and his little basket of carrots and fun stuff here.
This is Alligator, carved by George Gibson, one of the 4 horsemen. What's unusual about this horse is that he actually has coins in the bridle of the horse because the bank here in town sponsored the animal, and George was also a banker. The Lynnview Lynx was actually sponsored by graduates of Lynnview High School, and it was carved by Jim Fleming and Jim Wells. And Jim Fleming was the oldest carver on our carousel. He was 80 when he completed this animal. And what's really interesting about the lynx is he has his high school ring. This is Pooh, carved by Bobby Phillips. Pooh is a replica of Bobby and Dennis Phillips' pet dog.
This is an Indian pony that I originally wanted to do for the carousel along with the buffalo. The mane was actually carved and designed to wrap around the pole itself. This is basically a wolf that wraps around the piece and comes out all the way up to here. In order to make the mane the way it is there, I had to come up with something a little more extravagant than just a straight tail on the horse. Another thing about the horse is the bit that's in its mouth. It's not a bit that's actually fastened to the back of the mouth, but it's floating. The shield depicts both Chief Tuscaloosa and the Spaniard is De Soto. He was the one that's actually had the encounter in 1540. Well, I hope that it'll be here at least 100 years from now, and that people wear the saddle out on it.
They very thoughtfully pick which animal they're going to ride. It's not like they just willy-nilly jump on an animal. I mean, it takes a lot of thought to pick just exactly the right animal.
Wow. You got the whole time, okay?